The new Russian leader delivers the most anti-American speech of his one-month presidency. Dmitry Medvedev says the US has led the world into its worst financial crisis. So why is Moscow flexing its economic muscle now? And can it do any better than the US? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Darren Jordan. Well, Russia's President Dmitry Medvedev is blaming the United States for the world's current financial troubles and says Russia has the resources to come to the world's help. In his first major speech at home since becoming president last month, Medvedev said the US's place in the global economy is oversized compared to its real abilities. But in an apparent shift in tone from his predecessor, Vladimir Putin, he also pointed out that nationalism may not be the best way to resolve economic difficulties. Tim Friend now reports.
Dmitry Anatolievich Medvedev.
This was the Russian leader in assertive mood. Speaking to an international audience, he did not temper his message with unnecessary diplomacy. He said aggressive US financial policies were to blame for the global economic crisis, and Russia was ready to be part of the solution.
The fact that the formal role of the United States of America in the world's economy does not correspond with its real abilities is one of the main reasons for the current crisis.
He said this had led not only to corporate losses, but also to most people on the planet becoming poorer.
Russia today is a global player, and in understanding responsibility for the fate of the world, we want to participate in the formation of new rules of the game, not because of imperial ambitions, but because we have certain public abilities and resources.
US government officials at the meeting rejected the criticism, saying the US had never based its policies on economic nationalism. But Russia is clearly flexing its muscles. The country is now in its 10th year of economic boom, fueled by soaring prices for its oil and gas exports. It's the world's biggest gas producer and its second biggest oil exporter. Mr. Medvedev believes investment by cash-rich Russian companies abroad, promotion of Moscow as a major financial center, and use of the ruble as a reserve currency are part of the answer to the world's economic problems.
Mr. Medvedev is taking advantage of the difficult economic situation in the world and saying to foreign companies, come to Russia, we don't have the same problems at the moment, we are a strong economy, we can become the next big center of finance.
The Russian president said the United States alone, no matter how powerful its market and financial system, was incapable of substituting for global commodity and financial markets. Tim Friend, Al Jazeera.
Well, joining us now are our guests in Moscow, Sergei Strokhan, political analyst and columnist. In Washington, D.C., Janet McElligott, international business and political strategist. And in London, Jan Randolph, the chief economist at Global Insight. Sergei Strokhan in Moscow, let me start with you, if I may. I mean, why is Dmitry Medvedev making these comments now, and what's behind this pointed attack on the United States?
Well, I hope you will agree that it's an open secret that the world economy is in trouble, and the United States, as being the leading world economy, shares a lot of responsibility for all those troubles. But having said this, of course, we have also to admit that few world leaders would would blame the responsibility on that for the United States, as President Medvedev has done it in his recent St. Petersburg landmark appeal. So why is he saying this right now? There are, from my point of view, there are a few reasons. First, of course, is that President Medvedev is posing himself as a 100% successor of President Putin. President Putin repeatedly lashed out at the United States, calling America uncle in colonial helmet or Uncle Wolf who is listening to no one. Of course, President Medvedev, unlike President Putin, is not going for that type of rhetoric. But at the same time, what we see that the core of his message is the same: that we should not be disillusioned with America as being as the center of the world. And there is also a second important point. which I want to emphasize you. President Medvedev has made his statement just 2 days before the final trip of President Bush to Europe, where President Bush is going just to speak about the United States as a flagship of the world economy. Yeah.
Okay, let's bring in...
So this is also an important point.
That's fine, that's fine. Let's bring in Jan Randolph there in London. I mean, Sergei Strokhan's making an interesting point there, Jan Randolph, that Medvedev seems to be putting the world's economic troubles squarely at the door of Washington. I mean, it's not as simple as that, though, is it?
No, I mean, the credit crunch, one can trace back the causes to financial innovation in the United States. The defaults on the ground were very much in the United States. And so there is cause and effect there lying with the United States. At the same time, we've been through a 7-year-long global economic boom, and the most important piston in that boom has been the US household consumer. They're the ones that are buying goods from around the world, including China, India, and the rest of the world. And they have been the most important pillar, I would argue, vanguard in supporting global growth. Now, they've come unstuck, and the US economy is now suffering. Virtually no growth at the moment. Again, the US consumer looks very stretched. And so they are mainly suffering from, their own troubles, basically. But the rest of the world is still holding up quite well, particularly the emerging markets, and to a certain extent also Europe.
OK, well, let's put that point to Janet McElligott there in Washington, D.C. Jan Randolph says many experts say the US household consumer is the most important pillar of global economic growth over the last 7-year boom cycle. I mean, is Russia right to criticize the US then?
Well, Russia certainly takes a convenient pot shot at all Americans when they do this. And I think the timing of it is very suspect, right before Bush is leaving for Slovenia and the economic agenda summit that they're having there. But if you look at what's really causing the crunch in the United States, it's not just the downturn in the mortgage crisis, which basically is fueled by greed. Greedy bankers who wanted to make loans to people who probably shouldn't have had them. Greedy bankers who then repackaged them and sold them to other bankers around the world who wanted to make a good return and took high risks. And then you're looking at the cost of fuel and what has gone on with the oil market, because it's the oil market that's really putting the crunch on the American consumer, as our friend in London just said. When the production costs have remained the same and oil has spiked in excess of $100 over that production cost, who should we really be blaming? You look at Gazprom, who has signed agreements now with the Algerians, with Sonatrach, so that they can monopolize the entire European natural gas market and then march in as if they're the savior to all as an alternative to the Middle East. I don't find any of that genuine. I find it terribly disingenuine on the part of the Russians.
OK, let's bring in back Sergei Strokhan there in Moscow. I mean, Russia has significant economic problems of its own. It's got rising inflation, a weak investment climate and a declining population. Presumably, it needs to get its own house in order first before it sells itself to the rest of the world.
Well, at present, it seems that the economic situation is quite stable here. Russian currency reserves has reached an unprecedented level, and you know that oil prices are skyrocketing and Russia is awash in oil. At the same time, President Medvedev was a pioneer of so-called national projects, trying to give new impetus to the development of new technologies. We in Russia call it nanotechnologies here. At the same time, Russian government faces problems in taming inflation, and in addition to that, there are also some problems with foreign companies' operation at the Russian market. And the most bright example is the problems of British Petroleum here. That's why we can't say that.
But is that
Russian
due to some of your mafioso techniques that we see in Moscow and hear about all the time? I mean, when the Soviet Union disintegrated and the Russians basically broke up everything, you sold off so many of your state-owned enterprises at bottom basement prices and created oligarchs who now control an economy. The control of the economy isn't done centrally in Russia. It's done by these huge conglomerates and these people who then the KGB decides to off in London. that like they did recently, and people who know what's going on. That's what I find hard to swallow.
Sergei Strokhan, do you want to reply to that?
Well, I can partly agree with this. Definitely this problem is there. But at the same time, you know the figures. You know that Russia's GDP is growing by 10%. So no one can deny that at present Russian economy looks like, maybe not like a paradise, but at least like a sort of a safe haven for some companies, which would, of course, not challenge Russian state in key strategic sectors of the economy.
OK, let's bring in back Jan Randolph in London. I mean, it's an interesting point that Janet McElligott makes. I mean, the greatest criticism towards Russia seems to come from those foreign oil companies like BP. I mean, many of them have been forced to surrender their assets to the state after aggressive and sometimes legally dubious campaigns by the Kremlin. I mean, do investors have a problem with the rule of law in Russia?
The rolling back of privatization under Yeltsin, under more recently Putin, has unnerved investors. The key issue with Russia, which Russia doesn't really understand, Russia government doesn't get it, is that you need a stable investment environment, a predictable investment environment, where the rule of law is seen by everyone and everyone abides by it. And that includes the Russian government itself. But it's sometimes that Russia acts above the law. You know, your own government acting above the law is very disconcerting, both for businesses but for ordinary people as well. I mean, that's the key issue that Russia doesn't get yet. It's still very, its instincts are still statist, dirigiste. It is not, it's still relatively insecure from the loss of its Soviet empire. And it cannot allow, it needs to adopt a more regulatory role rather than an interventionist one. Now, there is some argument that perhaps the oil and state sector should be under state control and management. But it's not delivering in terms of better output. And it's not fostering an environment where it's voluntarily encouraging both domestic Russian investment as well as foreign investment. And that's the problem. Can I just ask one economic point about Russia? Russia is leveraging off other people's demand for its raw materials, its energy. The final source of all demand, including investment demand, are consumers. And Russia, in that respect, is not contributing to global growth. It is leveraging off everyone else's growth and in the process rolling in the money. OK, stay with us, won't you? Because it's time for a short break now. But when we come back, could Medvedev's comments add yet more tensions to the strained relations between Moscow and Washington? And how could that play out at next month's G8 summit? Stay with us, more on that.